All right, welcome back. For this segment, we're going to get into rear prop style fishing lures. More specifically, those larger examples for like musky and northern pike. I'm going to show you some of the most common ones out there that have been around for a long different time, and then I'm going to get into the my personal custom ones that I built, and get into some of the details of why I designed them in certain details into the lures. So most of you guys that are going into your standard box stores, you're going to find a rear prop system, something like this. Okay, a solid wire through with a rear section that will spin as it goes through the water. Now this one here has one single blade. That single blade, when it's going around in the water, it transitions the vibration and the offset, the unbalance of this piece through the entire lure. So you get that vibration along with the movement. So even though this blade is displacing water and it gives you that plop sound like a whopper plopper does, it's also creating vibration that is transferred through the leader into the head portion of the lure. So it's directing its action to fish that have, they're feeling the vibration and also seeing the silhouette of the lure, and are, because it is vibrating, it's breaking up that silhouette and making it look even smaller. So it's simulating something in distress. Now this is a very common design. The larger diameters, such as like the lead lures, variation of this, they've gone to that larger diameter because they're trying to get that larger silhouette. I believe one of his episodes, Today's Angler, they actually use a large, like a 30 millimeter tank casing. Okay, so it's really big in diameter, almost 3 inches, as one of their flap tail designs. That's going after that large silhouette. The smaller lures like this, you're going to get a lot of follows on it. And with the way this is constructed with a single blade on a solid leader, tuning the blade is going to be off of your ear. But if you can imagine what it's doing underneath the water and how that sound is transitioning through the water, that's going to be the key to having a strike or just a follow. It is going to be that sound and that tweaking. It's also going to control the rate of retrieve within that lure. So in order to get that plop, how fast you actually have to reel the line in. Changing the angles, as you guys can see here, this is not the factory setting. Changing the tips and stuff like that allows this lure to be retrieved slower and still have that tail action in the water, and it gives more of a plopping sound because as it comes around, it has more of a cup, like your palm of your hand hitting the water, giving that clunk noise. The lower pitch carries farther in the water than that metal tinging sound would if it was just the blade going through the water, just the slosh of the water. Here's just another variation of that same type of lure, but instead of it being a solid line through lure, one single shaft, it has a break in it, so a joint. And with this style of lure, your retrieve has to be slowed down because this spinning action and plop within the water becomes even more erratic, causing this lure to have a lot of action to it. As you can see, I have this one painted similar like a frog, like a lily pad jumper. And when you come to a slow motion, because the tail hook is actually shrink wrapped solid into place, it extends that weight much farther out. So it causes the tail of this lure, when it's going slower, to actually be down in the water like this. So as this plop comes around, it is only the very tip portion of the blade that's actually going out of the water and coming back in. So there's more water transferring over the blade to force it on the next revolution. You're not going to get as much vibration transferred from this piece through the head piece, but you're going to get a lot more side-to-side action because of that blade and that extended weight to the outside being tossed around you're going to get a wider action within the lure instead of just a straight line as you would with the fixed rear prop section. Changing little things up like that. Say if you're in the area, northern Wisconsin especially, this lure is very popular. It has been made for well over 30 years in this exact same design. And if you get to those high pressure waters, especially with tourism and stuff like that, this is a very cheap lure. It mimics the Joe Booker variation of it. They do catch fish. But by changing a little variation within the lure to a jointed section like this with a fixed treble hook at the back, it will produce more follows and more strikes than you would with something like that, especially in high pressured areas. Okay. Now those are the single blade rear prop styles. This is one of my customs here. This is the Quacker. Okay, this is also a single blade rear prop system. The difference between this blade and this one, if you notice, look at the position of where that blade is located within the rear tail section. This one, if you were to draw a vertical line through the center of that blade, you're almost in the middle of the tail piece. Okay, so it creates an unbalance. Okay, and then the trailing hook is not fixed, so that's going to hang down a little bit farther. On this one here, the blade is off towards the back, and the profile, even though the blade is bigger in length, it is canted back, so the difference from the profile of the top of the lure to the blade is reduced. What that creates is a more balanced spin. Now it's just enough in there that when the weight, if you watch these rabbit fur hairs here, as I spin that around, I'm going to try to hold as steady as I possibly can. You can see how they shake because that's still from the imbalance of that blade spinning around. Again, here's a brass blade. It has been tweaked multiple different times to get just the right cupping sound, and it has more area underneath the cup, so it has a larger or a louder thump when it goes into the water. That cupping of your hand, a larger thump. And then as it's going underneath the lure, it's also catching more water to throw it around the next revolution. This is a solid leader through design. So all the vibration from this imbalance of this tail shaft or this tail section here is vibrating up into the head section. Again, go with that larger diameter. You guys have noticed that I mounted, it almost looks like it runs upside down, but it's not. Okay, so that's the white belly. This is I don't know how well the camera picks it up. Let me see if I can. It is a yellow and silver glitter to it. Now, the color of the back of a surface lure has very little to do with what the fish underneath it can see in the water. But again, like the previous videos I've done, the larger the diameter of the lure, the larger of a profile that it presents on the surface of the water. On sunny days, when you're getting that reflection off of the lure, the edge of your lure becomes broken up and it resembles a smaller lure. The faster the retrieve, the lure also shrinks a little bit more. So by going to a larger diameter lure body with the single blade, which is going to be something that has to work with a faster retrieve to actually work, there's going to be tons of action in here on a continuous retrieve, and the lure is doing the work for you. And then all the painting is designed to add the detail towards the lower profile, so the eyeballs are taken in towards the bottom. So I added a little smiley face tooth grin here, and then adding skirting material just gives it a little bit more resemblance to an injured animal. So if you guys can see the profile behind my hand here is not just the lure itself. The skirting material gives a more centralized target for the fish to go at, a larger target, because this one has to be retrieved faster, getting that larger target, because these skirts break up the silhouette. It gives a general area of where the fish can hit. You notice this one does not have a head hook. All the hooks are towards the back. 99% of the time when I'm retrieving these type of lures, the strikes are follow-up from behind. So instead of letting the hooks hang down below to catch any kind of debris or any kind of structure that's underneath the water, the hooks, the trailing hooks, are towards the back, again, behind the vibration portion that the fish can actually see and pick up from their sensories, and that's the strike zone. So there's 3 treble hooks in the strike zone, and the way that you can get these treble hooks to stay in place is with some shrink wrap. You put the shrink wrap over, hold it in position, shrink it down, and then when it dries, it'll hold the hook in that position. The tail hook on this one is not shrink wrapped into place. It's actually tied off just like the leading edges of a bucktail. But that hook is now hanging down in there so that when the fish comes up, this is normally the hook that actually gets into the fish. Again, if the fish starts to go airborne, or if you let a little bit of slack off, which you don't ever want to do, that hook is going to stay embedded more often than these. The fixed ones, you have to have that solid concrete hook set onto them to hold those in place as the fish is thrashing around. There is some flex obviously within the leader shafts, the drop down shafts, but that's the reason why the design went into the Quacker here. The lighter colors, a lot of reflection, even though this is a 1 7/8 inch diameter dowel. With the lighter color, this is going to be something that's going to work really good in cloudy type situations or overcast situations. A faster retrieve, more calm water. This is not going to be self-stabilized. There's not as much weight hanging off the bottom of the lure. So this is not something that if you have, wave crest or anything like that, that this thing is going to really, stop the wobble or anything like that. There's no stabilizing angles or the weight distribution underneath this. This is going to be calmer days. Again, in those areas that I like to fish, that 5 to 15 foot deep of water with submerged weeds, or even around small patches of lily pads. Okay. Now a different variation, that's going to be a faster retrieve single tail prop style. The bearded dragon is another one of my custom ones, and the differences between that one, other ones, and this one is that it has a perfectly balanced out 2-blade rear tail section. You guys can see how the balance is really good. Again, going with that larger presentation of the entire lure size, creating more profile with the bushier tail and the whiskers underneath of the bearded dragon. It keeps that profile nice and strong. With the darker colors, the green, again on a sunnier day, this is going to be something that promotes that larger target. On a cloudy day, this lure is going to represent being one solid black color. So anything that you can do to entice a strike with this type of lure, the better. With the twin prop style, you guys can see it's actually more of a flat. There's not a cup to it. So this is not a whopper plopper. Even though it does have a plopping sound because of this angle right here, this cavity, as it goes around, it doesn't retrieve fast enough to actually create that sound. What that design does is cause this to spin at a very slow retrieve. You can literally walk this lure very slow right over that drop edge. Okay, if you have a weed edge, a drop off, and say you're in that 3 or 4 foot of water, then you have a weed bed right at the edge and then the major drop off. Working the inside of that weed edge, the shallows, is excellent for this type of lure. You can work it very slow, and because of that balance and the size of those blades, again, these are copper, they're not brass. That lightweight allows everything to spin very freely, even with a slow retrieve. And you let the feathers and the skirting material, that's what's fluttering and creating that action, but the lure is staying right there in the face. So if you have a fish that you've tossed lures over the top of, or you've marked it on your sonar or your fish finders, and the fish just doesn't want to move, getting this right in front of their face and giving them an easy target to go after, this is the situation. This is the lure I throw in those kind of situations. This is why these hooks are not fixed into the rear trailing position. These are allowed to hang down, because a lot of times those fish, they won't strike it until this lure gets right above them, and they'll just do a quick snatch. And that's why you want to get these hooks down into that position. Same with the rear tail treble. It is not fixed to the rear back, so the weight of this lure is right here. The center of balance is right here. Both of these custom ones are made out of, trying to think the name of the wood. It is a white wood. It's not cedar. These do have a small amount of lead in the bellies just to keep them upright. This one, like I said, not as much. These are in between that 3 to 4 ounce zone. This one's a little bit heavier. I think it's at the top of the scale, about 4 ounces. This one, about 3.5. And poplar. That's what this is. It's poplar wood. Solid poplar, just turned down. You'll notice the difference between the foils of each one of this one. This one's more of a bullet nose type style to it. This is more of a pointed style to it. That just comes out when you're turning them in the lathe. The sharper the nose is, the more straight and true the retrieve is. There is no sideward action. In the waves, it will really follow the same structure as the top of the water does, whereas in these will be more buoyant. The action will be rounded off. It'll be softened. Where the sharper point, it's more precise, like an arrow through the water. With a slow retrieve in this style, you're going to be able to see it. The top color of the lures, well, this one is basically to sell to fishermen. Okay, the fish don't ever see that, but it blends in to whatever structure you're fishing around. The brighter back colors of the lures are more for the fishermen to be able to see the lure in darker waters. Okay, that's the only reason. So blaze orange, yellow, anything that you can see. Now remember, it's not only being able to see the lure on a cloudy day in dark water. You have to be able to see the lure with reflection off the top of the lure, and when you're wearing whatever eye protection devices you have, sunglasses or whatever. If you have a yellow tinted lens in your glasses, you definitely don't want to pick a yellow lure on reflective waters. That's when you want to go to the darker color. Simple as that. It's there for you to be able to see it. I normally don't like fishing on 100-degree days, full sun, and just getting beaten down on. It causes the water temperature to get a little bit warmer. The fish start to get a little bit more stagnant. So I'm a early spring, opening season, and late season type fisherman where it's an overcast day, calm waters, very little wind. Those are the days that I seem to have the best ability to stay focused on fishing. And part of the experience of my life fishing with these lures and building them specific to customers or to my friends and family or myself, is that I'm targeting the days that I feel the most comfortable going out, because in my experience, the more you can stay focused on fishing and your mind isn't wandering and over other different things, you're letting go, you're out on the water, you forget about the stress, you're concentrating and focusing on catching that fish. When you can see the lure and see what it's doing, your brain has more function happening. It's not just concentrating on the senses that you have through your hand and through the rod and maybe some of the wind or waves that are going on in the water. You have something to focus on that lure, and the more focused you are on that lure, when a strike does happen, you are ready. You're not being caught off guard. Most of the time, I would say 50% of the fish that are missed is because people have gotten lackadaisical and just gone through the routine of tossing the lure out, just reeling it in, talking to a buddy or listening to radio, and they don't notice the wake that's coming up behind the lure. Okay, so just like in the last video with the flap tails, in these style surface lures, if you have a day that's very slow, or if you're fishing new waters, being able to concentrate on your lure and see it and matching the style of the prop to the water conditions and the sky conditions is going to just keep your focus in there, and you're going to land more fish than you would with other style of lures. These smaller lures that require a little bit faster retrieve. Now let's say you're working a bay within a freshwater lake, and there's weeds on one side, then you have some flat sandy areas and maybe some rock structure on the right side. To cover that area, you're going to pinpoint the weeds and you're going to pinpoint the rock structure, but that middle sandy area, if you're tossing a lure, you're tossing this out there because it's so light and the retrieves are so fast that you're throwing it out there, bringing it in, and you're hoping that something that's in the cover is actually going to come across that area. And majority of the time, that does not happen. Okay, because the lure is from point A to the boat, or from out on the water to the shoreline, if you're fishing on the shore, that lure covers that area in a fast amount of time, and it's not really in the face of the fish. And a lot of times the larger fish don't like going after the very fast prey fish. They don't like to exert the energy. They like to have something that's either injured or something that's trapped and cornered into an area where they don't have to exert a lot of energy. Especially the bigger the fish are, the less energy they like to exert on getting their prey. And a lot of times, if you have fish that are holding down belly to the bottom, in order to get them to come all the way up to the surface, you have to have something that's in their face that they can focus on, stay there, and it continuously keeps them enticed with movement and vibration, that they come up and basically just take it, such as like a baby duck or something like that. That is where the slower retrieve type twin prop style lures are going to come into effect. It's in one location, you have a lot of movement, a lot of vibration, but you're not traveling over a large area very fast. But because of the larger profile of the lure and the action in the components of brass, or the sound is traveling in a greater distance, even if you're in the middle of that sand flat with the structure off to the sides and you have a lure like this right down the middle, and you're going slower and slower and slower, you'll be able to see the fish that slowly start to migrate out of the cover, coming to investigate your lure. You don't have to toss this lure out 15, 20 times over, say, like a 100 square foot area to entice a surrounding fish. You can toss this in the middle of it, and if the fish have any interest in it whatsoever, they're going to come out from the cover to come get it. Just trying to think if I got any other ones hanging here. Okay, other details as far as box store type lures and custom lures. Now, between my custom lures and a box store lures, the hardware itself, the hooks, the leaders, and even the line ties and stuff like that are basically the same. The gauge of the wire with your quality musky lures is going to be larger, 60 thousandths or more. Where your box store stuff, it's going to be thin. It's going to limit you to how many times that lure can be eaten or snagged up before it starts to weaken out or snap. Especially on larger fish, you're not going to be catching 50-inch fish with something with a 30 gauge wire. It'll snap eventually if it's bent and wore out. The thicker gauge, you can correct things and tweak them and stuff like that over time, and it'll last a little bit longer. But most of the components that you see, I'm going to get real close so you guys can see here. If you notice the hardware going into the nose of both of these lures, this one is just basically a rivet top that is not sealed in whatsoever. Okay, it might just be super glued into place. Where you notice that my custom version actually has a bead that is put inside of the lure with a hole through it for the leader and is glued into place. It gives 2 position points between that bead. And then also there is a piece of shrink wrap or shrink tubing over the twist of that metal. Now, if you guys are ever in the weeds, you realize how much of the weeds snag up on that kind of a design. This one also allows water to travel through the center of the lure. This one retains, it's not waterproof, but it's water resistant as far as getting water through the inside. Now with plastic lures, you don't have to necessarily worry about water getting inside. But if you guys are building wooden lures, any kind of water that gets inside of that will cause the wood to swell and break down the wood from the inside out. Easy enough to understand, right? When you are creating your pivot, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this. Right there, let me see if I can get a pointer to see that a little bit better. You can see the inside of that rear prop section. The leader does not go through just the wood. It actually has a brass tube that is glued into place. So any of the water that actually gets inside of that leader into the lure, it's not going into the wood. That brass tubing keeps it out. And that also gives a better frictional material so that this spins easier. Make sense? The closer you can get this body portion to the front, the better. Because when you start catching fish, especially on this tail section, and it starts to bend, this area here, you're going to have to tweak out and straighten out. The closer you can get this rear section together, the less twist that there's going to be. And it's going to be a lot easier to grab it and tweak it back and get it straight. You're not twisting it back and forth. It's just like taking a paper clip and bending it 50 times. It's going to snap. It's the exact same idea. Now, in between the joints, again, just like the bead that's in the nose portion of the lure, there is a bead in the rear section of the main body. The cup of the rear section matches that bead. And you can see how close that is. Now, it's in the water. It spreads it apart a little bit. That's there for weeds. The water will come in here, and the water is dragged out. So it'll actually help to keep this section of the lure less weeds. Okay, it'll pick up less weeds than I'm hooking on to everything here. It'll collect less weeds than if you have a jointed variation like this, that the leader is just pinched off and dragged into the wood itself. That picks up a lot more weeds and gets a lot more tangles than that design. Those are just a few variations of all the ones that are out there. These are the fixed blade rear prop styles. There's also variations where they have multiple sections within the rear props, or they have blades themselves that just rotate around the leader itself. Mammoth Lures out of Illinois, they have their lure actually uses two different blades that are fixed to a swivel on the leader, and you can tweak those blades, those two different sets of blades, for different sounds, and you can actually cause them to make contact, and that's where you're getting that sound from. It's not more of a plop. Those two gentlemen, I've bought a couple different lures from them. They're fairly high quality, but again, they're mass produced components that they're getting from a local stamping individual that stamps out the blades for them. They're exact duplicates, basically, of ones that you can get at Ron and Helen's Musky shop and their bait building supplies. But they're almost always made out of light gauge metal or stainless steel. Right? Almost all box store lures are using that. The stainless steel or something that's not going to get a lot of surface rust, where brass and copper you can buy sheets of it and cut out your own shapes. So it's a learning experience to get the shapes that you actually work, and the different shapes create different sounds, different vibrations. And when you're fishing high pressured areas, anything that can make your lure different than what the masses are using, the better off you're going to do. So especially if you're getting into tournaments where there's 50 other or 100 other boats on the water, having a lure that stands out from the rest, okay, then the only thing you have to do is find the fish, and you let the lure do the rest. All right, with that, over 30 minutes already, so I'm going to cut it off. Those are the fixed rear prop style lures that are out there. There's multiple different variations. Again, if you guys ever find any of mine that are on the market, that's the label of the tinted fishing lure. If you find one of those, you do have a collector. The lures that I've made, approximately 100 of them. Out of those 100, 10 of them have been custom surface lures. And if they don't have a name or initials somewhere around the label, those are store-bought or store-produced versions. If you have ones that have any kind of initials on it, those are specifically made to the person that those initials match to. So if you have somebody that bought one off me, put it onto a shelf, say they went through, passed away or something like that, and they have an estate sale and that lure passes away, or that lure, if that lure, you find that lure with the labels on there, that's a very collectible piece that you have. All of my lures are designed to be used to fish. Period. They're not just show pieces. But making one of one and the quality and the time that I put in the lures, you can also collect these. So if you want to have a curio cabinet or something, you want to put these off or hang it from a net or something like that in your man room, you have something to show somebody and go off of. All right, with that, I'm getting too long. We'll catch you guys later.